Greetings, friends, fellow Earthlings, and explorers out here in the void. And welcome to Ask An Astrobiologist, the show that celebrates the science and the scientists in our quest to understand the nature of life in the universe. We're brought to you by the NASA Astrobiology Program and SaganNet.org. And of course, as usual, I'm your host, Dr. Graham Lau, who today is dressed as a Jedi Master. We always want to say thanks to all of you out there sharing about our show, engaging with information we share on social media and the emails that we share about our guests and the incredible things they do, who come into the live episodes on YouTube and ask questions in the chat. This month, we want to send a special shout out to Nareej Shah, who posted online saying that he was looking forward to David Grinspoon's insights on astrobiology and research at NASA. Nareej has always been fascinated by the possibility of extraterrestrial life, and understanding that would be a game changer, Nareej says. So thank you, Nareej, and thank you all for watching. Now, today's episode is going to be especially groovy and funky and everything in between. Joining us today, we have Dr. David Grinspoon. He's the senior scientist for Astrobiology Strategy at NASA, a guiding light for astrobiology in our quest to understand the nature of life and where it will go at NASA. He studied philosophy and planetary science at Brown University and the University of Arizona. David has been the curator for astrobiology at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and he was the Barrick Bloomberg Chair for Astrobiology at the Library of Congress. David has been a frequent guest on Star Talk Radio. He's an accomplished author, which I have 3 of his books right here with me during our show. He's also known for his musical prowess and his capabilities on the guitar. Now, today, of course, is also a special time of year for many of us around the world. People are celebrating Diwali in India and other nations. Dia de los Muertos has started down in Mexico and other nations. Here in the U.S., we're celebrating Halloween, where we like to be festive and costumed. And it's a great day for us to celebrate our understanding of life and to speak with Dr. Grinspoon about his vision for astrobiology, his career, his life, and where the future of NASA is going. So, Dr. Grinspoon, thank you so much for joining us for Ask An Astrobiologist.
Greetings, people of Earth. I have come for your candy. Earth candy has a reputation all over the galaxy. What do I have to do to get some Earth candy?
That'll be kind of scary and fun, I think, for many of the children out there who might be watching our show. Again, it is Halloween, maybe not for those who are watching the recorded version, but it's so great to have David joining us for the show. From my own perspective, I can share that I was very fortunate to meet David for the first time in 2009 when I first moved to Colorado. Back then, David was just getting into his role as the curator for astrobiology at the Denver Museum. He was very gracious in sharing his time with the Astrobiology Club at the University of Colorado and speaking about various topics in astrobiology with us. He's always been very supportive of my own career as well as the careers of many others in the realm of astrobiology. And so it's so great now to have him being part of NASA and guiding the strategy for NASA. Now, of course, David, with our show, the first place we love to start with all of our guests is to hear about what got you involved and interested in being an astrobiologist in the first place. Basically, what was your science origin story?
Hey, Graham. First of all, thanks a lot for having me on your show. It's great to see you. It's great to be out of that mask. The things we do for our Earth holidays. My origin story as an astrobiologist. The beginning of it will sound almost cliche, but it's true for me, and I think for a lot of scientists of my generation, which is that seeing the moon landings as a kid, literally my first vivid memory, I was in 4th grade when Neil and Buzz stepped on the moon. And, it was really exciting that I was allowed to stay up so late. That was almost as exciting as the fact they were landing on the moon. But then that seared into my brain, those black and white images of them stepping off the limb and everything. And that it was just so exciting. And then I kind of I think kind of inevitably became a science fiction geek as a young kid and a space geek. And I was just really so enamored of science fiction and caught up in the early space exploration that was going on when I was a kid. And, when I was young and in my like early teens, there was we were landing on Mars for the first time, and when I was in high school, we were launching Voyager off to the outer solar system. All these things were happening for the first time, and it just seemed like that was where we were moving as a species, and that I was caught up in wanting to be part of it. So it was, I don't know, just to me, it was the most exciting thing happening when I was a kid. And then, full disclosure, my dad's best friend was Carl Sagan. When I was a kid, he was Uncle Carl. He was around the house a lot, and was definitely a big influence. This is way before he got famous. He was just this cool guy who was an astronomer, who was a friend of the family, and would like take the kids, along to public night at the observatory and to planetarium shows. And, so I think there were also some influential adults in my life when I was a kid who were involved in stuff that just seemed so cool. And I wanted to be a part of it.
That's incredible. I mean, I think many people are probably very jealous, for one thing, of having had Carl Sagan as a family friend and knowing him so well. I, unfortunately, like many, did not know Carl before his life ended so soon, back in the 1990s. Now, I do recall that there's a picture out there, I think you shared on Facebook quite some time ago, of you at JPL when you were younger with quite a large hairdo, working with Carl at JPL and doing some of your early research kind of in that realm of planetary science. Can you share with us kind of what your journey has been? I mean, you've done so many different kinds of things, from being in academia and earning a PhD to, some teaching at the University of Colorado, to working in a museum setting as a curator, to the Library of Congress, and now to NASA. What's been really driving your career through all these transitions?
Well, yeah. So, as I mentioned, I was a teenage space geek, and then when I went to college, I thought for a brief time I was going to be a physicist, and I wanted to work on fusion energy because it was right around the corner, and it was, it's always right around the corner. It was going to solve the energy crisis. But then my freshman year at Brown University, I took a class with Jim Head called Mars, the Moon, and the Earth, which enthralled me. Many of you probably know Jim Head, or by reputation, he's kind of a Pied Piper of planetary science. In addition to being a good scientist himself, he's somebody that lures students in to become, there's just a lot of undergraduates and grad students that have fallen under the spell due to his influence. And I was one of them. And I ended up getting a summer job working for him and for another professor named Tim Much, who was the head of the Viking mission camera team. And so I had a summer job working on the then new Viking lander images of Mars. My first research job was literally counting the rocks at the Viking 1 and 2 landing sites and digitizing the position of every rock, which you can joke, boy, that's pretty boring. You're counting rocks, but those rocks were on Mars, and I was spending so much time immersed in those surface panoramas that I started to feel like I knew that landscape, like I was hanging out on Mars for my summer job. And that was just really neat. And then, I got other research summer jobs, and I ended up getting a summer job out at JPL during the Voyager 2 Jupiter encounter, which is where that picture you're referring to with me with my big head of hair, as a skinny student with the intern with the Voyager imaging team. And that was an incredible experience. Just sort of being in the room with all these senior scientists and postdocs who were getting down the pictures from Voyager and seeing their first impressions of these images and how they were interpreting them and sort of doing science on the fly, and just kind of, being a fly on the wall during that. Again, it made me really want to be part of that, not just of the science, but of the teamwork, being on a mission team, I could just see was such a cool thing. And I wanted to be a part of spacecraft teams, which then I was later able to do. And, I won't go through every step of my journey, but I went to grad school in at University of Arizona in planetary science, which was then a pretty new field. There was a department of planetary science, but none of my professors had degrees in planetary science. It was still sort of that new, and which is now something I observe about astrobiology, that people are doing astrobiology, but they don't really have degrees in astrobiology. And I think that's a generational thing that they will, in the future. But so then I did a postdoc and really focused on evolution of planetary atmospheres was the thing I got really into, and got really interested in the planet Venus and sort of the Venus-Earth comparisons. During my postdoc was when the Magellan mission was returning images of Venus, and there were some weird things about the surface of Venus where it seemed like it was all the same age, and that didn't make any sense. And then my postdoctoral advisor and I and some students started doing some models of what that might mean for the evolution of the atmosphere, and sort of connecting what was happening in the atmosphere of planets with the surface evolution. And then that got me thinking about habitability and how sort of planets change over time, and the surface conditions can change as a result of what's happening with the geology and the atmospheric evolution. And I kind of caught the astrobiology wave because I was starting to wrestle with these questions really in the 1990s, when astrobiology became more of a mainstream thing. It had been a fringe pursuit, exobiology, and then it became more mainstream right around the time when I was getting involved in my career and getting my first research grants. And so then you could be an astrobiologist, even if you had been a planetary scientist or a microbiologist or whatever. There was this new field of all these people coming together and doing astrobiology from all these different perspectives. And so my timing was good to really be a part of that from the beginning. And then I was a faculty member at University of Colorado for a while. And then I ended up being a museum curator at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I was the first curator of astrobiology. After that, I ended up at the Library of Congress doing a chair in astrobiology, writing a book. Then after that, I got very involved in a spacecraft mission called the Da Vinci mission, proposing and getting rejected, and then finally getting the mission, greenlit by NASA after, more than a decade of proposing it in various forms. And that's kind of what I was doing as a research scientist and a writer. And that was my career until about a little over a year ago. I saw this ad that NASA was looking for new leadership in the astrobiology program. And I thought, not really looking for a new job, but that sounds pretty cool. And I might be able to get it, and I might want it. And if I'm ever going to do something like that, become a NASA official, opportunities like this don't come along that often. So I should maybe jump at this chance if I think I ever want to do this. And that was sort of my motivation. And I proposed and I got offered the job. And so here I am at NASA helping to run the astrobiology program. And, that's it. That's my life.
It's so groovy, man. Yes, I mean, there's so much cool stuff that you've done there. And that's great advice also for people who are watching. Like, sometimes chances come up and you have to just jump at them and take your chances and see where it takes you. Now, of course, you have written several books. I love Lonely Planets. It's the first book of yours that I read. It's a great read, kind of a general astrobiology approach. But your very first book, which unfortunately is the only one I haven't read, is Venus Revealed, where you speak about Venus, our understanding of it. And of course, you're involved with the Da Vinci mission. A lot has changed, obviously, here recently for Venus, ever since Jane Greaves and her colleagues published a paper suggesting a potential presence of phosphine in the Venusian atmosphere. A lot of people got very interested in possible alien life in the Venusian atmosphere, or, as many of us have been pointing out in the planetary science community for a long time, we just don't know enough about Venus. We keep sending things to Mars and other places. Do you think Venus is going to get some more love now that we have a few more missions kind of planned and coming up, and that we have some more idea of where we want to go with Venus explorations in the future?
Absolutely. Yeah. Venus, it's time is kind of coming back around. It's been a little bit neglected, and there's some reasons for that. It's a tough place to explore. It's definitely not the low-hanging fruit. If you've got a budget for exploration and you want to promise that you can get certain amount of data back for a certain amount of money, you don't necessarily send that spacecraft to Venus. But after it's been neglected long enough, then you realize there's this big gap in what we know about the solar system, and it's the planet right next door that has a lot of similarities to Earth and a lot of intriguing differences, and it's kind of embarrassing that we don't know more. So, hey, we better send some missions there. So now we have the Da Vinci mission, which is an entry probe, which I'm very involved in. We have the Veritas mission, which is an orbiter, which is kind of its sister mission. And then the Europeans have a mission called Envision, which is very complementary as well, which is another kind of orbiter. And as well, it looks like the Indian Space Agency has approved a new Venus mission. China might be sending a mission to Venus. The Japanese have sent a mission called Akatsuki. So there's this sort of global effort, which I love, from Earth to understand this planet next door better. And, it's interesting the way it relates to astrobiology, because on the one hand, it's like, well, why would you go to Venus? It's like, it's an oven. Forget it. But there's a couple of angles. One, it was probably a lot more Earth-like in the past. And we're very interested in how planets lose habitability. There are probably a lot of exoplanets out there that are very much like Venus. And if we don't understand the Earth-Venus difference in our solar system, then we have a prayer of understanding when we start getting those data back from those, those exo-Venuses and exo-Earths, and trying to understand what makes a planet go down one path or the other. And then there's also this intriguing possibility that I've actually promoted for a long time, that there could be a habitat in the clouds of Venus, which is not something I would say, oh, there's definitely life in the clouds of Venus, let's go find it. But as a way of sort of stretching our imaginations, what do we really know about the requirements for life? How sure are we that we're right about those? And what kinds of environments might support life if we change the requirements a little bit? And what's interesting about the clouds of Venus is that it's an active place chemically. There's disequilibrium. There are liquid solutions and interesting chemistry happening in those solutions. And so if we don't require something that's just like Earth environments that support life, but we say, well, a liquid place with a lot of interesting chemistry and energy and nutrients could support life, then you have to expand your horizons and say, well, we can't completely rule out a place like the clouds of Venus until we explore it more. So it's almost kind of like a devil's advocate argument that, like, well, we can't really be so sure. And there are some intriguing observations that don't, there's some anomalies in the clouds of Venus that, again, that doesn't mean there's life, but it means there are things that need to be explained in an environment that I don't think you can 100% rule out for life. And so we need to explore it, if for no other reason than to learn that there's no life there and then become smarter about where else to look for life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's incredible. And so it makes me think a lot about the future for Venus exploration and what could be happening. You mentioned, NASA and ESA kind of missions. Also, a company called Rocket Lab was planning potentially a private mission to go to Venus. And that might become more of a common thing as more private space is happening in the future. And also with, new technologies, with artificial intelligence and machine learning, with new automations for designing pieces for spacecraft faster, more off-the-shelf components for spacecraft. It might end up being that we have a lot more exploration of Venus and other worlds in the future. And that kind of leads me to the next thing to talk about, which is you recently convened a workshop to speak about the future of astrobiology, the future of NASA research, the future of our quest to understand life. And so we put out a poll last night for our audiences on YouTube and across the interwebs to ask them of various topics of the future of astrobiology, what intrigued people the most. And we gave a few possible options, as well as allowing people to comment with their own ideas. One option was the impacts of climate change. Of course, studying worlds like Venus can help us understand long-term climatic and planetary scale changes. We had technosignatures on there, which is a growing realm of not only fascination, but also of active, rigorous study with the folks in astrobiology, trying to understand if we can not only find intelligent radio signals coming to us, but also other possible signs of intelligence out there from the cosmos. But the one that people voted on the most, over 55% of people selected this one, it was the longevity of civilizations. And so I wonder for you, for one thing, how was that meeting, since I didn't have a chance to attend, but also what do you think is the most driving issue right now for the future of astrobiology?
Yeah, well, great question. Let me just make a distinction that meeting about the future of life was not exactly about the future of astrobiology, although the two are closely connected. It was literally the science of the future of life in the universe. And part of the reason we held it was because, when we define what astrobiology is, one thing we often say is it's the study of the origin, evolution, distribution, and future of life in the universe. And sometimes we talk about, these three driving questions of astrobiology. Where did life come from? How do we identify life, and what is the future of life in the universe? But the fact is, we haven't had that much organized activity about the future of life. And when I got to NASA headquarters, I started talking to people about this almost as kind of like first, as a little bit of a game. Hey, why do we always talk about the future of life if we're not studying it? We're studying the origin, evolution, and distribution. Why do we define that as part of astrobiology? And as I talked it up at headquarters, I realized there are a lot of interesting subjects that fall under the future of life that potentially could even lead to some new research directions. And part of what I'm trying to do at headquarters is sort of broaden astrobiology too, and seek those new kinds of collaborations, not just in planetary science, but with astrophysics, biological science, earth science. So I thought this future of life topic would be kind of a neat organizing principle for a meeting to get these different disciplines together and think of some new research ideas. So that was the basis of this astrobiology and the future of life meeting we just had. And what was really cool about it was that it was an unusual gathering of scientists that aren't always in the same room together. Some of the usual suspects from astrobiology, but more people from astrophysics and heliophysics and some of these other areas. And we kind of congregated around some of these questions. And you raised this question of longevity. And what's interesting about that is that as we think about Earth's future, we're used to thinking of climate change on, say, 100-year timescale for obvious reasons. We have to worry about it on that timescale. And we have all these charts showing that, the CO2 going up and the temperature going up. And we're rightfully worried about the next century. But as scientists, we realize that things happen on much longer timescales. And it's interesting to say, well, what happens if we model the future of climate on not just 100 years, but 10,000 years, 1,000,000 years? And then you start getting into thinking about exoplanets. And the fact is, when we imagine searching and detecting exoplanets and studying them, we've done a lot of looking at what's the past spectra of Earth. How would you identify an Earth from the Archean or the Proterozoic, these past eras where we have some ideas about what the atmosphere was like, and we can even search for counterparts of Earth, which is helpful so that we're not just searching for modern day Earth. We can broaden our palette. So at this meeting, people started talking about, well, how do we search for a future Earth? We can't predict the future, but we can model different scenarios for what's possibly going to happen with the biosphere. We know what's going to happen with plate tectonics, kind of. We know what's going to happen with the sun, kind of. And we can even start to model if there are different kinds of civilizations, how do they affect the Earth? And this gets into the notion of the Anthropocene, that we've entered this geological epoch where humans have become a major geological force, whether we like it or not. So you combine all that together and you start realizing we can imagine what a sustainable civilization would be like in terms of how it would interact with the planet. And we can model the characteristics of that. And then we can even say, how would you search for that? And that gets us back into exoplanets and technosignatures. So this exercise of trying to imagine sustainable futures for ourselves, which I think we would all agree is an important exercise, kind of blends into this exercise of imagining what we might observe out there on exoplanets and with searching for technosignatures. So there was a lot of kind of meeting of the minds from these different communities that are used to thinking of these separate problems and imagining research programs where we can sort of combine these perspectives to get some more clarifying ideas about possible futures for life on Earth and for life elsewhere.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think, a lot of our science fiction movies and such, we might, in science fiction give aliens spaceships and let them travel faster than light so we actually can tell stories across the stars, but we often envision alien worlds being almost exactly like our world is right now. Rarely are we thinking of alien worlds like Earth 2 billion years ago or a billion years ago, let alone Earth in 10,000 years or in a billion years. So I love that kind of focus on different ways of viewing through time, how different civilizations, different biospheres might function for astrobiology. It seems really crucial, especially with where we are right now and kind of how we're thinking of our own future on Earth as well, because longevity of civilization includes the longevity of our own civilization. And it's very easy for us to think that everything will be static and won't ever change. And anyone who reads anything in history knows that that's just not the case. And it most likely won't be the case for our future either.
Absolutely. And this is a way that I think, you can ask, why do we pursue astrobiology? And there's all kinds of different answers. And let's face it, some of it is just because it's fun and cool and we're curious and we love it for its own sake. But there's also, I do believe, a very useful aspect to it. And that gets, partly the comparative planetology and the wider perspective we get on Earth and on our own biosphere. And thinking of our biosphere as a planetary process can help us do a better job at understanding what it needs to be, what it takes to have a healthy biosphere. And then thinking of, as you mentioned, of our civilization on these longer timescales, which is not always our reference frame, but comes naturally when you're thinking of planetary evolution and thinking of astrobiology and what else might be out there. I do think that it's really vital for us to imagine ourselves as part of this longer term sequence of transitions. And that's a way that astrobiology is, not only fun and cool, but I think potentially very, very useful to us as a species at this time in history as we're wrestling with what it means to be actors on a planetary scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And, NASA has a huge role in kind of envisioning where this is going for us all as well. And so I do have to speak a little bit about where you envision NASA itself going to. There has been some change in astrobiology at NASA lately. The NASA Astrobiology Institute completed its mission and is no longer existent. A lot of the focus has gone to the NASA Astrobiology program, of which we now have the research coordination networks, Nexus, Enfold, Life, Now, PC3, kind of giving us different directions and collaborations across the realm of astrobiology, specifically through NASA. And so now that you're involved in helping to guide the future strategy of NASA, how do you see things like the RCNs and the role of NASA astrobiology as a program taking a lead in where the future of this science goes?
Yeah, great question. My role, specifically my title is Senior Scientist for Astrobiology Strategy. And so I'm working very closely with my colleague, Dr. Becky Macaulay-Wrench, who's now the program scientist for astrobiology, in kind of running the program. And my side of, and we do a lot, it's a very close partnership, but my side of things is more the strategic, looking to the future, looking sort of up and out, as we say, and trying to take stock of where the field is, where it's going, its health, what the community needs from NASA to be healthy. So the point you raised, that we've gone through this transition not too long ago from the NASA Astrobiology Institute to a more distributed kind of model where we focus on these research coordination networks. And I've been trying to take stock of where we are, how have we done through that transition now that it's a few years old. What have we lost from the NAI, from the Astrobiology Institute, that maybe we should try to regain, or how are we doing? And so, the research coordination networks, I think, and you listed them off, I think are doing a really good job at kind of organizing the community. One thing, we were getting a lot of feedback from the RCN leadership that they were maybe being asked to do a little bit too much with the resources that they were being given from NASA headquarters, because, in this transition from the NAI, there was a lot more sort of centralized support when they had the NAI. So we heard that critique, that concern, and we've recently made some changes where we've institutionalized giving a little bit more support to the RCN leadership, both in terms of we've hired somebody at NASA headquarters now who's going to help help with sort of managerial support for them. And then we've also found an avenue to give them a little bit more financial support, so they're not just digging into their own grants to support this. So we're making some adjustments in how all that works. But the benefit from going to that more distributed model is, I think, that we're expanding our community, and that's something that I'm really focused on. And especially given some exciting new science, there's a lot of opportunity for astrobiology to keep expanding its role at NASA. It's interesting when you hear NASA officials up on, we talk about the ninth floor, like the people really running the agency, that they often frame NASA's mission, at least in part, in terms of the quest to understand life and define life in the universe, which I love. We're very proud of that astrobiology in the messaging is central, but astrobiology's role is still, I think, expanding and can be more central in the role of the organization. So throughout what we call the Science Mission Directorate, beyond planetary science, there's the Astrophysics Division, the Heliophysics Division, the Biological and Physical Sciences Division, the Earth Sciences Division. So I've been putting a lot of my effort into cementing the connections with those other parts of NASA. Because if you think about it, a lot of what we've been talking about, exoplanets, is a huge new thing that, when the NASA Astrobiology Institute was founded, they were barely on the screen. Now we know about thousands of them, and we're building a habitable worlds observatory to actually characterize potential habitable Earth-like planets. So that's something that is largely housed in the astrophysics division, and yet obviously it's hugely central to astrobiology. So astrobiology doesn't just live in planetary science anymore. Likewise, some of what we've been talking about with Earth science and these connections to to climate change, and thinking of the biosphere as a planetary scale, really as another Earth process, another kind of geological process, really life and civilization now. And then there are these other connections like ocean worlds. Obviously, we've just launched a spacecraft to Europa. So we need the oceanography community and the ocean drilling community, that have largely historically been part of Earth science, to work with us, and they are working with us. But we're trying to sort of cement those bridges and solidify those bridges more. And that's part of what I'm really working on. And we're starting a new process to come up with a new astrobiology strategy that we really want to involve the community. And when I say the community, I don't just mean, of course, I mean the mainstream astrobiology community as it's existed is very central to this, but we also want to draw in people from the exoplanets astrophysics community and the Earth systems climate change community and the heliophysics, and really broaden the scope of astrobiology to be a more sort of pan NASA set of activity, and not just NASA, the scientific community out there that NASA supports and represents.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And as folks know, for myself, I just gave my first TEDx talk recently about this concept I created called the Panzoic effect, that brings in sociology and psychology and some other realms into astrobiology as well. I'll be giving a version of that talk next month in Abu Dhabi. There's a lot of other realms besides just the science and the engineering that you mentioned. There's so much going on that people want to be involved in our quest to understand the nature of life. And so that's so very groovy and funky in fun ways. Just for timing's sake, I do want to get to our audience's questions soon. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Of the books of yours that I've read, there's one that I really love that I've come back to many times now. And I guess I just held it the wrong way. Because you can see all the tabs I have inside of it. It's your book, Earth in Human Hands. That was kind of the culmination of your time at the Library of Congress and your work as the first chair of astrobiology at the LOC. And I mean, I can't recommend the book highly enough to everyone out there. There's so many incredible thoughts in there, connecting planetary science and our understanding of climate history and Venus and Mars to Earth, of where we are right now as human actors on this planet and the way that we're changing things, but also the potential future for humanity, the longevity of our civilization. You speak to that What was it that really kind of was your guiding principle that got you so intrigued and to want to create a book like Earth in Human Hands?
Oh, good question. Honestly, that book is something that I had on the back burner for a long time. One thing that you find as you go through a scientific career is that you kind of get busier and busier because, when you become a quote mid-career scientist, not only are you trying to do your research, but you get asked to be on more committees and all this stuff, which is great. But, I had written my first two books when I was a little bit earlier in my career and sort of managed to squeeze them in. And partly that's also because when you're younger, you don't mind staying up till 2 a.m. in that, all night cafe with, with drinking coffee and like finishing a chapter. And, it's like, it just gets harder to fit being a writer into a career, I found. So I had this idea of writing a book about, humanity as both as a chapter on Earth and then as sort of combining that with ideas about SETI and thinking about what it means to have a species that becomes a planetary actor and how that challenges our notions of longevity and of ourselves and I was struggling to find time to write this book. And then I saw the advertisement for this new opportunity at the Library of Congress for a chair of astrobiology. And the advertisement said they were looking for people to work on the intersection between astrobiology and the humanities and larger societal questions. And I thought, hey, maybe that's an opportunity to write that book. So I already had a book proposal, and I turned that into my proposal for the astrobiology chair at the Library of Congress with a little editing task, and I got selected. And so then that opened up an amazing portal for me to be at the Library of Congress and to have the time and the contacts and the resources to write that book. Because one thing I didn't realize, it wasn't just a nice office and time to write, but you're interacting with all these scholars, these environmental historians and theologians, and people that I found really enriched my perspective in working at that book. So that experience at the Library of Congress was great. And anybody that's watching this who's an astrobiologist who is looking for a sabbatical opportunity at some point to work on something a little bit different, I recommend thinking about that program. And it is one way, as you mentioned, astrobiology is not just about the science, but about the sociology and these wider ideas about what it means to be a human. And that program at the Library of Congress is one way that we in the astrobiology program at NASA are supporting those interactions with the humanities, which is an important aspect of astrobiology. So I'm glad you mentioned that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had several other LOC chairs on, so it's so great to have the first inaugural LOC chair on the show here as well. Before I go to our Faster Than Light segment, I do want to ask about your musical background. I've known you for some time now. It's always great hearing you play guitar. You just posted on Facebook today. You're playing Tom Petty's Wildflowers. Fantastic song, by the way. And it's always been fun. At every AppSciCon, you end up playing in the open mic nights. You've played with bands. My wife and I still have a DVD, I think, on our shelf upstairs of the House Band of the Universe from DMNS from some years ago playing. And we watch that every now and then. Like, what has been this inspiration for you to be so involved in making music? And how do you see music being a part of your life?
Yeah, it's always been a part of my life since I was pretty young. And, when we were doing sort of the deep background, and I mentioned when I was a kid, the most exciting thing I could perceive in the universe was space. I would amend that to say the other most exciting thing was rock and roll music, which as a kid, I was just like, it was like the Beatles and the Monkees, and then graduating on to the Allman Brothers and the Grateful Dead, and then graduating out to reggae and world music and African and jazz. And it just became this expanding universe that still is infinitely expanding for me. And I've been playing in bands ever since I was in junior high school. My first band was called Liquid Earth. And then in high school, I was in a band called Hyperdrive. You can see there's kind of a theme to some of these. And then, House Band of the Universe was really fun when I was at DMNS because we would play in the planetarium, and then we managed to do a national tour of planetariums, and that was largely instrumental music with spoken word stories about the universe. And then we had Dr. Kachun Yu from DMNS, who's our graphics wizard, using Uniview and projecting incredible images that then he was like a member of the band where the music was synced to the visuals. So that was really fun. I would love to be able to do that more in the future. It's it's logistically challenging getting the musicians together in the planetarium and everything, but when it works, it's fantastic. So music for me has always been kind of another avenue of expression, and another way of connecting with people. I feel like it's really broadened me out, not just as like a diversion, but as a way to connect with communities of people that I wouldn't have connected with otherwise, which I think also does ultimately affect how I am as a scientist and as a communicator. I mean, I toured with reggae bands, and I toured around Africa for a while with a Zimbabwean band, and doing those things just put me in contact with other kinds of communities that I wouldn't have been otherwise. And I feel like that's just, it's a wonderful gift. And then it also feeds back into how you are as a communicator of, really about anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel that a lot too. I mean, I think those of us who love sharing what we do also love sharing in various ways, including how we make music and create art and things like that, to express ourselves for others. I do have to jump to our Faster Than Light segment now. These are the questions we ask everyone who comes on the show, just to get a range of different answers from people from across the realm of astrobiology. So for starters, what is your favorite thing that life on Earth does?
That's such a cool question. I would say symbiosis. Like the fact that so much of life's innovation is involved in the interactions between organisms, and organisms sort of helping each other out. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, but on this very deep level of collections of organisms doing things that they couldn't by themselves. And even, that gets into like the global notion of the Gaia hypothesis of organisms kind of interacting on a global level to regulate various aspects of our environment, and even thinking about ourselves as individuals. It turns out we're not individuals. Like we have this commensal microbiome where there's like 30 trillion microbes living inside of you that are an essential part of how you function, So just that realization that the notion of individuals acting for themselves is not actually how life works, and that life is all about the interactions between different organisms, facilitating ways of being that would not be possible if we and other organisms were really just individuals.
Yeah, it's groovy. Yeah, there's something, like as Ed Young writes, we could contain multitudes. We have so much living on us and in us, and we're part of a much larger system that we live on and in too. I love that so much. So kind of along the lines of life on Earth as well, if you could communicate with any non-human organism on Earth, what would it be, and what would you want to talk about?
Oh man. I have two answers. One is I would really like my dog to be able to tell me like what's bugging you. but thinking on a wider level, I think about these giant like supposedly the largest organisms on Earth are these fungal networks. There's one sort of collective fungus that in some ways is one organism that's I don't know how many hundreds of tons it is somewhere out in the West, or these aspen groves that take up like a whole mountain that in some way are single organisms, and I would just love to be able to just ask them what it's like. What's it like to be a living forest the size of a mountain, and how do things look to you, and maybe kind of apologize to them a little bit for the way we've conducted ourselves and ask for a second chance.
Yeah, it's pretty groovy. Yes, if you go out to Utah, Pando is the large aspen grove, and you can go camp on top of Pando. Pando is 20,000 individual trees, and you can camp on top of it. But it's also kind of sad because you'll see people have etched with knives and things, their names into these trees. And Pando himself, most of the clones are male. He is dying right now, and some part of that might be because of our human influence or because of the climate and its changes right now. And so there is a lot of really cool research going on about Pando and ways that we humans can support him continuing his existence. But it is pretty special to go sleep on top of him if you can. It's very much worthwhile.
Man, so you've actually had a conversation with Pando. I was just imagining.
Yeah. Yeah, I've gone out and I've slept on the ground on top of the large network underground of his root system.
Wow.
Yeah, it's worth the time. Let's try a career question then. If you could go back and visit yourself at the start of your career, what advice would you give yourself?
I would tell myself not to worry as much about the future, to be a little bit less neurotic, because doors open and paths have a way of working out. And I mean, my career has been so nonlinear. I mentioned some of it to you, and then some of it I didn't even get to. But I've literally worked in so many different settings: at a NASA research center, at a university, at a private lab, at a museum, at a library, now at a government agency, and I couldn't see any of that coming. And I just think that, if you apply yourself and learn what you want to learn, and develop some knowledge and some skills, that things will open up for you. And so I would just tell myself to relax a little bit more than I did at various times when I was really pretty neurotic about, like, oh my God, if I don't get into this school or I don't get this job, then there's just going to be nothing for me to do. There's always something.
Yeah, it's interesting how our anxieties look so minimal in retrospect, but in the moment they feel like it's everything. So our last question of our Faster Than Light segment is also our favorite to ask everyone, and it's kind of groovy. What is an unbelievable science fact that still blows your mind?
An unbelievable science fact that still blows my mind. I would say that when you look at the number of atoms in a human body, it's 1,000,000 times the number of stars in the universe. When I first calculated that, I thought maybe I had done something wrong, because, we're so used to thinking we're so tiny and so minuscule in the vastness of the universe. And we're always talking about how many stars there are, and therefore there's probably life somewhere, because even if, the probabilities and which is true, that in a lot of ways we're tiny and the universe is vast. But in at least this one way, it's true that if stars were atoms, then you have 1,000,000 universes inside of you. And I still can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah, it's amazing, like the power of scale, and our understanding of numbers. My young son is 5 right now, and he's beginning to explore numbers and understanding that you can take some numbers and add them to other numbers and create bigger numbers. But his mind is still kind of in that like up to like number 20 kind of early zone of understanding. And so it's kind of hard to even try to express, 100 or 1,000. And then even those of us who train for decades in the sciences and engineering fields, and we use mathematics in our daily lives all the time, even then it's still hard to start to fathom, these great exponential orders of numbers and the way that scale really does impact us in the universe. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. And what fun for you to see your son, like, having those realizations for the first time.
Yeah, that's pretty,
kind of like see if you can sort of push his boundaries a little bit and kind of see what he comprehends. And that must be a really fun set of conversations you guys have.
Yeah, it is quite magical, experiencing someone else learning in that way. I will go to our audience Q&A now. We have a few questions that came in from our audience who are watching right now live. So thank you so much to all of you who are asking questions. We have about 10 minutes left in the show, so I'm going to go a little fast here in some of these questions, but some of them are really good, so I do want to get to them. Our first question comes from Bartosz on X. Bartosz wants to know if we have simulations of life not based on carbon, And would it be possible for us to survive viruses or bacteria from such kinds of life forms?
Such a good question. We don't have any successful simulations where somebody said, "Hey, I'm going to make a model of life based on something that's not carbon, and look, it works just as well." That would be pretty mind blowing if somebody was able to come up with that. And some smart people have tried. And it may just be that we haven't hit on the right recipe yet. I mean, I'm a fan of carbon-based life. I'm also a fan of exploring very widely, because the universe comes up with things that we can't imagine, and that's what we learn again and again through exploration. But the short answer, and I'm not giving you a short answer, is that no, nobody's come up with a model for non-carbon-based life that works yet.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there's a great paper out there that Sarah Seeger and I think William Baines wrote together. They have a third colleague, I'm forgetting who it is right now, apologies. But it's a review of silicon-based life, and it's definitely a worthy read for those who are interested in that topic. We talked about the impacts of sociology and psychology and astrobiology. Dr. Jim Pass, who loves asking questions about sociology, chimed in with this question. How does life on Earth benefit from our research findings related to Venus and other bodies, especially given how underappreciated the values of space exploration really are?
I love that question. For one thing, that perspective of comparative planetology, which is something we've really only been able to do in the last, I guess 2 generations since we've been sending spacecraft to other planets, has given us some huge insights into our own planet. And, the obvious ones are, when we think about climate change, we need to validate our models and make sure we're not missing something. So when we model climate on Venus and Mars and see that we're basically getting the right answer, it's validating. But then there are details of our climate models that are improved when we stretch them to model these other climates. And similar with some other atmospheric problems or environmental problems like acid rain, the problem with the ozone layer. You can give specific examples of things we've learned through planetary exploration that have helped us deal with these problems. And, again, the theory of nuclear winter was devised by scientists who were the same scientists who were studying dust storms on Mars. And then they said, well, what happens when you fill an atmosphere with particles? It really changes the climate. Oh, that would happen during a nuclear war. So there are direct lessons that help us do a better job with our environment that come from comparative planetology. And then there are also these perspective benefits. And you've mentioned the what's your word for the perspective of
the Panzoic effect?
Yeah, there's the Panzoic effect. I love it. And the overview effect, and all these, just the way that expanding our minds to realize that it's not just us, that we are maybe an example of something that may be occurring in different ways other places, and that the timescales involved are so much longer, as we were discussing earlier, than what we often focus on. Space exploration and astrobiology change our perspective in ways that I think are actually vital for us to have the right mindset to sort of graduate to being a responsible technological species on this planet.
Yeah, I love that so much. We have a question from Ada Shooting Star on X. They have an interesting question. How do you think we'll redefine life if we discover extraterrestrial organisms? And I think I'll say first to Ada that we don't actually define life. There have been over 300 attempts at defining life, and no single one is actually accepted by everyone. There's no consensus right now on what life is. Trying to figure out what life is, what intelligence is, what consciousness is kind of what we're all doing right now in this realm of astrobiology. But what do you think, David, to Ada's question of how we might define or redefine life if we find ET?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and as you say, we can't agree on a definition, and the fundamental reason why we can't agree on a definition is we only have one example of life. We talk about biodiversity on this planet, and through one lens, it's huge, but through another lens, there isn't any, because it's all stems from apparently one origin, and we all have the same, set of biochemical tools. So how do we define something that we only have one example of? So I think that that one of the wonderful benefits of discovering extraterrestrial life It will mature us scientifically, and I think in other ways so much. But one thing we will be able to do when we have multiple examples is finally define life. Because once we have multiple examples, then we can do a much more meaningful job of saying, okay, these are the commonalities, these are the characteristics, these things are all life. Here's why. Here's how we define it. So I think the questions are intrinsically linked of trying to define it and trying to find it. And of course, there's a paradox there, because how do you search for something that you can't even say exactly what you're searching for? But that paradox, I think, will be resolved once we have multiple examples.
Very cool. So we are running a little short on time now, so I think I'm going to ask our final question right now from user AC on YouTube. They say it's a super hypothetical question, but it's really not. It's kind of a question we all kind of get very often, especially given your role, David. If NASA had an unlimited budget, what kind of mission would you want to propose to do an astrobiology discovery mission?
An unlimited budget. Wow. I'm just going to go with if we had a much larger budget. But I think, there's so many missions we want to do, and we're so resource constrained. So we have these decadal surveys, and we pick maybe one big mission a decade. So we're going to Europa, and that's awesome, to try to characterize its habitability. We're all excited about that. Of course, again, unlimited budget. I wouldn't just be sending an orbiter around Jupiter to make close passes of Europa. I would also be landing on Europa, despite Arthur C. Clarke's warnings, and maybe going into that ocean with something to we'll get there eventually. But again, money's no object. Let's do it now. And then, of course, not just Europa, but Enceladus and Titan, the moons of Saturn, are places that we would be doing more if we suddenly had more resources. We have to go to Enceladus. It's spewing water, rich with interesting chemicals out into space. So let's see what's in that ocean. Let's go to Titan and understand what's happening in those lakes, and with the organics, and where the water from the interior mixes with organic. I'm giving you a laundry list, and not giving you one mission, but that's my answer, is that I would do all of the things that we have on our list for what we want to do in the next several decades. If I could, I'd do them all now, and I'd live to see the answers.
Yeah, no kidding. Imagine if we spent like 10% of the world's military budget on space exploration. It'd be a game changer overnight. There's so much more we can do.
We wouldn't need military, because everybody would just be going, "That's so cool." They wouldn't want to fight each other.
Having those really cool, groovy experiences where you funk out a little bit and you realize there's a lot more than just being angry at each other all the time. David, it's been so awesome having you on Ask an Astrobiologist. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to talk about these topics with you, Graham.
Yeah, and I hope for everyone out there that you'll follow up, jump on YouTube and the interwebs and find all of the cool things David does, from the awesome songs that he shared on the interwebs to his amazing books. I highly recommend the 3 that I've read. I'm sure at some point I'll read his 4th one. But Earth in Human Hands, Lonely Planets, Chasing New Horizons, these are great reads for you to explore more. And reach out to David online. He's an incredible person to learn more from in astrobiology. And reach out to me if you have questions that I can help you with as well, and guiding your career and your passion, your interest in astrobiology and learning more. Of course, you can also follow along with the NASA Astrobiology program by joining our mailing list. You'll get emails about Ask an Astrobiologist, but also about all of the other awesome things that NASA Astrobiology is part of, from workshops and seminars, various meetings of the RCNs, things like that. And to all of you who are watching out there live right now in the chat, thank you. To all of you who are watching later on YouTube, thank you very much. And usually I sign off with the Vulcan salute, but given that I'm wearing a Jedi robe, that doesn't seem quite right. So I'll say until next time, stay curious, and may the Force be with you.